That just gave me about 50 questions actually. But I find that really interesting, like putting it into different pools, like if you do rotate out, say at the top of the bull cycle or something like that. I'm also curious too. This brings up a great tweet I saw from Gary Woods funding Jim. I didn't bring it up to you, Ewok. I'm not sure if you would have seen this too. But he was tweeting about, and I think this is what Richard Hart's been trying to do, is to build a DeFi ecosystem. You know, we've talked about the PDI stuff in the past. We've talked about like him potentially trying to create a DeFi utopia where people never have to leave kind of a Hotel California on PulseChain. And Frank's kind of describing that idea where it's like, okay, so I've got my 5555 stake. I've got maybe a Pulse X liquidity. You did mention this, but you could also do stables. Like if you wanted to get into stables, there is that stable pool now on PulseChain of the three main stable coins that you can pull together and earn a modest yield. Apparently it is like 8 or 9% right now, which is pretty great for stables. Not always going to be that.
It's labeled at about 10.5% currently.
Okay.
So
not going to be that high in the bear market probably, but just another, basically these different things. But Gary Wood's poll question was basically like, what would the percentage of yield, and he wasn't taking like Hex into account, he was assuming stable coins, but he's like, what would the percentage of yield need to be for you to stay on chain, to stay in crypto in the bear market, to earn yield on your fiat or your dollars or whatever you want to say, rather than going out entirely, putting it in index funds, putting it in a money market, whatever it may be, obviously all products that you're familiar with, Frank. And I'm curious, like, is there any part of you that wants to do that, or maybe you already have something out there to where it's like, you know, some people may have a plan, you know, where they're like, hey, I've been burned in crypto cycles before. I want to get the majority out and just throw it in like the S&P 500, throw it in an index fund, and then have cash to buy back in at the bottom again. I'm just curious if you are interested at all in using like legacy financial tools after that, or if you're really planning on being like 100% all on chain after that.
My concern about rotating into equities is a taxable event. And the thing is this: if I decide to rotate into the S&P 500 and then say I cash out $1 million, hypothetical numbers, you know, I'm not disclosing anything about myself, but I'm paying a 40-50% tax, so I'm giving away 400,000. There's not an equity on this planet where it can justify the return where I could get that money back. So I literally just burned 400,000, just because I decided to go into equities. What's the number for me? I'm happy with 5-6%. I'm happy 5-6% stables, or not even stables, just on a PulseChain PulseX yield farm, 5-6% in the bear market, and I don't have to trigger a taxable event. That's happy for me, man. Because imagine how long it would take me to recover that 400,000 if I leave it into the S&P 500. It would take me a decade to recover that.
Yeah, you'd miss the next cycle.
You'd miss the next cycle. So what is the point of me going and just rotating to the S&P to trigger a taxable event and then having to pay that $400,000 tax fee? That doesn't make any sense. I'd rather just stay, take the hit on paper, because I will take a hit on paper. But as long as I don't trigger the actual sell, the hit on paper doesn't bother me. And if I hit the actual, and if I don't have to hit the actual sell and I can generate a yield at 6, 7%, 8% on a yield farm, and I never actually trigger the sell of my assets, I'm happy, man. I'm happy. But people will not be happy unless they understand what's out there. And because I understand what's out there, because I come from TradFi, I have a greater appreciation for the 6, 7, 8% on a yield farm. I can appreciate that 7% because in order for me to generate that 7% in the S&P, I have to trigger a 40% taxable event. Then I have to rotate into the S&P, and then I have to wait 10 years to recover that 400,000. And then it's gravy from top of that. When I could just stay in the PulseChain network, stay in the liquidity farm pools, not trigger the taxable event, keep the paper loss, which simply just means hold for 4 years till it recovers, and then collect the yield in the meantime. I'm happy with that. Like, I'm genuinely happy with that. Some people are not, you know, but that's where greed comes in. And people develop greed because they haven't developed the experience in actual investing. Like there's a difference between like being an investor and being like a short-term trader. And the people who are not happy with 6-7% are the ones who are not investors. I am an investor. I'm very boring. People don't like this stuff, but it's what works.
Yeah.
Well said. Yeah, I thought that was an interesting pull though by Gary, because that's something that again, people, we want those products on chain. So just like you said, you don't have to, and even if you didn't take like a tax hit, like even if you just getting into those vehicles, like many people actually that are aware and smart with crypto know nothing about the traditional finance vehicles. You know what I mean? And they'll get into some mutual fund or a managed fund where there's like a 2% expense ratio and just get raked over the coals by these scam artists in traditional finance. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, people like to talk about scammers in crypto. Motherfucker, you haven't seen the scammers on TradFi, okay? Like those dudes, just because they wear suits and ties and they have the law behind them, doesn't mean they're not fucking you over with their 2 and 20 fees. Like that's killing you, right? But
Yeah.
you're not gonna understand it unless you lived it.